Hey guys, for those who don't know me, I'm Seal. I work here as a product manager at the Experience Center. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Theo Edmonds. He is a population health innovator here in Louisville, born and raised, if I'm not mistaken. His focus is around specifically finding the intersection of culture and healthcare that enables us to make people's lives better. He is a member of staff at U of L and a co-founder of Ideas X Lab, as well as a member of many different community organizations and boards here in Louisville. Please welcome Theo.
How's everybody doing today? So I was not raised in Louisville. I am from Kentucky. I'm a 9th-generation Southeastern Kentucky family. If you've maybe heard the book about the book Hillbilly Elegy, that is literally about my hometown. So today there's a lot of things I could talk to you about, so I've decided to focus on really two things that I want to kind of share out. One is something that's happening right now, that's Civitas, which is the new LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce here in town, and then the other one is something that we're working on with a number of partners for 2020 called the Cultural Wellbeing Initiative 2020. So first I want to tell you about Civitas. We launched in April of this year. We are the regional affiliate of the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, and with Civitas there's really three reasons that we exist. First, our geography is Louisville, Cincinnati, and Lexington. And then also we have the full spectrum of the LGBTQ community on the board and as part of it. There's really three reasons we exist. One is LGBTQ business certification. Who knows, is anyone familiar with certification for supply chain contracts? So if you're there, not every corporation, but many corporations, Fortune 100, 500 across America, have what they call a diversity spin. So at the corporate level, they set supply chain contracts, and then to qualify for those supply chain contracts, you have to be certified, for example, as a minority certified business, a woman certified business, an LGBTQ certified business. The National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce is the only certifying body for LGBTQ businesses in the nation, which means that Civitas here locally are the regional certifier body for LGBTQ businesses, but we do that in coordination with the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. The second reason we exist, and I'm going to touch a little bit on this also in the second piece of the presentation today, is to support corporations in creating more inclusive environments. It is a fact that only about 50% of LGBT folks in the South feel safe coming out at work, and there's a number of reasons for that. I'm sorry, it's 50% is the national number, it's 80% in the South. So that's a basic innovation challenge. If you are only bringing a piece of yourself to work and you're being asked to engage in innovation, and especially at the population level, and you're not really using that lived experience, that's a problem. Well, the reason for a lot of this is because the non-inclusive nature of a lot of our businesses. We've confused diversity, which is a policy outcome, with inclusion, which is a cultural outcome, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the last thing that we do at Civitas is to expand investment in and support for LGBTQ entrepreneurs. So there's different ways you can engage. Civitas LGBTQ.org is our website. There's different levels of membership you can go to and work and see there, from organization to individual. We are working on a plan right now to look at about 12-month research initiative that would be the first LGBTQ economy report for this entire region. It becomes important in 2020 with the census, because the LGBTQ population will not be counted in the 2020 census, which means essentially 10 years of invisibility in federal data. So surfacing that early is an important thing for us. Also with entrepreneurial meetups and educational events, and if you're interested, actually tonight, in partnership with Queer Kentucky, which is an online health blog about the LGBTQ population here in Kentucky, we are having a meetup at Story Louisville. Story is the new entrepreneur space that's located down at 900 East Main at the corner of Campbell. That event starts at 5:30. Stop by tonight. We're going to be talking about some entrepreneurial meetups specifically for LGBTQ community that we're starting to plan. And then more importantly, we're going to be starting to really talk about a big event. October the 11th is National LGBTQ Coming Out Day. We're planning an entire week of events called Y'all Come Out Now with our corporate partners to surface visibility of the LGBTQ community in our business sector. This is the big project I really wanted to give you all a little bit of an insight to today. It's our partner in this project is the Office of Performance and Improvement, which is the innovation arm of our city government, and also the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. Their executive, Nikki Jackson, is also a partner in this work with us. The work is about making the invisible visible. It's called the Cultural Wellbeing Index 2020. So when most people think about culture, they have some notion around arts or something like that. Health disparities in arts are both outcomes of culture. But culture is often thought of as something that needs to be overcome in order to improve health. But actually, my work focuses on how understanding culture is the very foundation from which to build successful strategies. Not something that needs to be fixed, but something that needs to be integrated as a primary lens for understanding how to design things. Culture cuts across almost every aspect of the social ecological model. So whether you're dealing with policy issues or whether you're dealing with individual therapeutic issues at an individual level, culture is a cross-cutting factor. At the Center for Creative Place Healing, which launched in January of this year, I'm an assistant professor at the School of Public Health and also the founding director of the center. We have 3 different levels of engagement that we have with the community. One is we support individual creatives, and by creatives here we think about even public health PhDs, MPHs. We would consider those creatives. Most of the MPH, PhD folks have traditionally thought of public health as you have really kind of 2 job options. You have the option of going to work in the public health department or something like that, or you have an option of going into a university. The challenge with that is for the last 25 or so years, those jobs have been disappearing. And so what we end up with is VC and so forth funding MBA types that have technology in search, a solution in search of a problem, rather than looking at public health folks who have this really deep domain systems level experience and training them to be entrepreneurs so they can really develop out the right solution for the right problem. Engaging with arts organizations, we all know, or I hope we all know, that when you experience the arts, there are some positive medical benefits that accrue to you from reduction in cortisol levels and other things. The problem with a lot of arts organizations is they don't really know, because there's so much science out there, how to really engage the science around what they're saying and wanting to do with their creative production. And there's an increasing number of creatives and arts organizations looking to do that. And so what we do is we help to decipher all of the research and the science to support them in their creative production. So their creative output becomes evidence-informed, if not evidence-based. An example of that might be our partnership with Creative Aging International. We're working with Creative Aging International as the largest producer of creative aging festivals in the world. It's located in Dublin, Ireland. And we're working on a partnership with them right now at the Ali Center to bring Creative Aging Festival here as part of the Week of Ali coming up next year. And then at the top level, direct engagement with the business sector. The business community is our end user for the Center for Creative Place Healing. That is our customer, that is who we talk to. And while we are very interested in working with healthcare groups, we are primarily interested in working with people who are not thinking about health every day. We're looking at advanced manufacturing, we're looking at service industries, we're looking at those types of industries that are not thinking about health every single day. Because right now, most of those organizations do not really see health outside of maybe a cost concern or a population health agenda as having anything necessarily to do with them, outside of some type of a notion of employee well-being and an algorithm that calculates the cost on that. So what we're doing is to translate in a lot of research for direct action by those in the private sector. Here's why it's important to the economy of Louisville. This is from the Greater Louisville Project. In the last 10 years, among our competitor cities, and there's 17 in the cohort that Louisville considers itself a part of, we're the only city to have actually lost population in the last 10 years. And even though we have become the most insured city from a health care perspective, health care insurance, our health outcomes have slipped down next to the bottom. So clearly when we're talking about access to care and those types of topics, something clearly is happening more than just the insurance question, more than just the geography question. So we started asking ourselves, what is really going on here? Another example I always like to point out that this is not just a Louisville problem, this is a bigger problem. Stanford had produced a really interesting article about a year and a half ago in its Social Innovation Review, and they conducted a meta-analysis. One of the things they looked at was diabetes prevention programs. If you're the article is called Needs Equals Demand Fallacy in Healthcare. So if you were just looking at the numbers alone, there should be 90 million people up who need a diabetes prevention program of some kind. Stanford's analysis showed that there are less than 30,000 people enrolled at any given time in the diabetes prevention program in the United States. So we are designing solutions for 90 million people, less than 30 are enrolling. That's fundamentally a cultural question. And the World Health Organization itself has identified the systematic neglect of culture in health and health care as the single greatest barrier to the advancement of the highest standard of health worldwide. On a more entrepreneurial business front, Techstars spent a good amount of time in Louisville producing a report for LEAP, the Louisville Entrepreneur Accelerator Partnership, which is looking at the growth of our entrepreneurial ecosystem in Louisville. The number one pillar that Techstars really interesting report, and this is all available online if you're interested, is that culture and a lack of culture of inclusion is one of our biggest foundational barriers in Louisville to seeing and accelerating entrepreneurial growth. So part of the reason most businesses do not see a health agenda as their agenda is just has to do with day-to-day operations. Some folks like Humana have health and the delivery of it and the financing of it as your core reason for existing. So you're waking up thinking about health every single day. Some businesses are compelled to think about health. A grocery store might be around that. So it's not their core business, but they're compelled to think about it. Other businesses are incompatible with health. That would be things like gaming and liquor distributors and tobacco. A lot of the things that our contemporary economy was actually built upon in Kentucky. It's not a value judgment or to call out any one particular sectors, to recognize that all of these industry sectors have got to be at the table and see our collective agenda as their agenda, because if they're not, we're actually not working with a full economy, which engaging the private sector on the economic front has got to be an increasingly important part of the health and healthcare delivery agenda if we're able to see the success that we are all working toward. On a more individual level, and if you're looking at issues of inclusion in the workplace, workplace discrimination is still the most frequently reported experience. African American perception of unemployment, equality, and pay. 71% of African Americans believe that where they live, they have fewer employment opportunities just because they are African American. I want to point out that this is talking about perception, subjective well-being. Before anybody might be wishing to write this off because it's a subjective, a perception measure, I want to remind you that the Healthy Days measure is a subjective measure that Humana is using also. There's an immense amount of research out there that shows that the subjective reporting of well-being is accurate and directly correlates across many fronts. Corporate Equality Index from the Human Rights Campaign. Companies, Humana was one of them, who love getting their 100 score on their, and ads get taken out to promote we are an inclusive workplace. That's a great start, but the words you see there are not my editorial. That was directly out of the report from this year. Policy does not equal practice. The index is looking at, do you have the policies on the books? It's asking about diversity, not inclusion. Retaining workers is largely about everyday experiences. That 50% of LGBT workers remain closeted on the job, that's a national number. In our market, it is nearly 80%, and across the South, it's over 80%. The this is not just about LGBT. There are basic economic arguments to be made for this. If you look at the number of Americans who identify as LGBTQ, it's 4%. So we say that's a 4% of the market. Why are we going to invest too much in looking at that? Well, 35% of Gen Z, and by 2025, that's 1/5 of the American workforce has fluid orientation. 50% say they have, gay people have the same rights as everyone else. Then you get up to 64% say they will be more likely to spend money with LGBT inclusive brands, and 92% of Fortune 500 companies are encountering or working with non-discrimination policies based on sexual orientation. Those are still diversity questions. Diversity and inclusion are not the same thing. As we move from a knowledge-based economy where people are hired heads, there's a number, this is talked about in many different ways, I just pulled this from HBR, a number of organizations are beginning to understand as AI begins to replace many of the jobs that we're looking at, that it is things like creativity, passion, and those things that are distinctly human are going to be the differentiators for one company over another, one economy over another. Who has figured out how to really harness the power that those types of things represent? They can't be replicated, at least right now, by AI. So I think that if we are able to think about moving beyond diversity to inclusion, diversity is important. I'm not suggesting this is a both and, not an either or strategy I'm suggesting. That we have all the ingredients here in this market to become the epicenter of the human economy. Again, diversity is what it looks like. Inclusion is what it feels like. So when we think about things like subjective well-being, and we know that those are accurate reporting measures that correlate directly with very tangible outcomes, why do we get so nervous when we start talking about inclusion efforts and feelings as if these are something that we do not know how to engage, that these are something that we do not know how to quantify? Because we are quantifying the impacts of these every single day in public health and population health. The economic burden of depression is nearly $250 billion drag on our American economy. From a trust standpoint, Pew reports that only about half of us trust each other, only about 60% trust the medical profession. And racial health disparities, belonging, are just a great example of a belonging metric that we quantify that equates to $250 billion annually in lost human potential and economic value. Deloitte, in a report it produced this year, showed that if there is diversity of thinking, this is an inclusion question, not a diversity what it looks like question, but diversity of thinking increases innovation output by 20%, decreases innovation risk by 30%. And for those organizations that have figured out how to do inclusive cultures, there are performance accelerators across a number of KPIs as we look at this. And so taking all of this into account, so what we've been working on for the last year is with about a team of 5 researchers that we have developed something called a cultural well-being index. We're in the process of doing a validation study on this right now with the National Science Foundation and a large multinational corporation, looking specifically at employees who are caregivers in a caregiver setting. Can we measure well-being? That's both the subjective and the objective components of health. And can well-being then correlate to a predictive measure of inclusion? And can the two together correlate to a predictive analytic for innovation output? All the research says yes. Just in the last year, Gallup organization, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Deloitte, and I'm blanking on it, one more. Who was it? Anyway, all came out with really interesting reports on inclusion in the American economy as a basic economic paradigm. All of them said almost verbatim the same thing, that the way that we are thinking about culture and inclusion in the workplace is not going to get us where we need to be. And the reason they say that is because we are not thinking about holistic measures of inclusion that are tied to employee well-being and tied to organizational outcomes. We're asking questions like, does this group of folks work well with this group of folks? Are a group of folks that have these strengths compatible with a group of folks with these strengths? That's not really addressing the underlying culture of an organization of, is it truly an inclusive culture where if I'm at Latinx female executive from California, and I'm recruited into an executive position at Humana, is the culture such that I'm going to feel comfortable bringing my whole self to work and looking at this as being a long-term gig for me? The numbers say no for our part of it. And I'm using the managers, I'm not calling them man out because it's every organization is having this problem. UPS Airlines, Ford, everybody is experiencing the same question. That is why the St. Louis Federal Reserve has also been very supportive in helping to kind of guide and shape our thinking around this, because this is a basic economic development issue for our community. So as we go forward into 2020, we're launching the Cultural Wellbeing 2020 initiative. We're doing this in partnership with the National Science Foundation through CHOT, the Center for Health Organization Transformation. We're recruiting no more than probably 8 to 10 corporations and large organizations initially to be on this journey with us. And they will become part of the Center for Health Organization Transformation. These are all the universities that are part of it. So this is the mechanism that we're using to onboard corporations who are interested in becoming part of this study. It is going to be a randomized controlled trial that we're doing. So what's going to happen is in January, we will, the corporations that are on board with this will all take the survey, the instrument that we've created, and we'll randomize a group out. That group will go through a radically inclusive innovation design sprint across 3 different sessions, and then we'll measure everybody again at the end. The idea being that one will go through business as usual, the other one will go through this truly radically inclusive design that we based upon something that's called the PIN 3 culture model. It's been used to develop culturally responsive medical care by the World Health Organization in delivering breastfeeding and different things around the world, because breastfeeding in sub-Saharan Africa is fundamentally different in its cultural context, for instance, than it is in Appalachia. And so even that has a lot of good science behind it. And then after the first 6 months of collecting this data, we will then work with the corporations and our research partners to crunch all the data, and then in November of 2020, we will bring folks together into a national summit. We will report out all of the work, and then we will use that data to create an economic development agenda that leverages well-being science for economic development strategy in a way that we're using science to improve employee retention and talent attraction rates, well-being on the cost side and compliance side of organizations, and then also predictive market performance and even shareholder value on the innovation output. That's why we're focusing on working with larger corporations that are publicly traded right now. I will stop there and see what questions you have.
When you talk about changing like culture, like how do you go about that outside? Like we all do this stuff, but how do you go about changing culture at such a large scale in the South?
Yeah, we're not focusing on changing culture in the South. We're focusing first on shifting culture inside of the organizations that we're going to be working with. The South is a much that's a much bigger. Maybe in my lifetime I might get to a place where I'd be willing to bite that off, but I doubt it. But we're really focusing on the organizational unit of measure, because if we don't do that, there's just not the capacity in the organizational hierarchy that we need to really execute a program in an efficient way within our resource constraint. Because once you start getting into a community at large, a population at large, it gets much messier, much more quickly, and for reasons that I can talk through all day long why that is. But what's really interesting is we've done this so here's typically if you think about a lot of the way we, in public health and so forth, tends to talk about some of these issues. There's community needs assessments, and all these needs get identified down, here on one level, and then all those require resources to be done. And then we say also all these policies have to change and have to become more equitable. And it's yes to both of those things. But again, I go back to this, we're in a 30-year almost decline in social services funding in this part of the country, and we're at the beginning of the privatization of the public health sector. And so when you think about that, and you think about what is available to us to work with, well, very rarely has the business community been really fully engaged in the way that we're suggesting that they be engaged around this, because what we're asking Wellbeing research to do is to help businesses achieve the outcomes that they understand that are important to them in their reason for existing, right? So Humana is thinking about well-being every day, but a lot of other companies, that's just not the top thing on their radar. And then especially if you're a public traded company and you're looking at the next quarter and the shareholder call, I mean, you know, that gets really, how far out are you going to go to keep thinking about well-being? What we're doing is tying it directly into both the cost side of the house and the compliance side of the house, employee health and well-being, and much in the same way that Humana is thinking about it with your associates and with your insured population. But more importantly, what we're doing is we've got the research that points to this is a basic innovation principle that is going to increase innovation output, which is a growth strategy that often is not talking to the cost and compliance side of the house that are looking at these issues in HR and D&I and those kinds of things on a daily basis. So we're trying to even bring those two sides of the house together, which in and of itself is a challenge to do. I mean, like, you know, so specificity is our friend in this case to get the model out there and proven, and then we can, you know, increasingly go larger and larger.
What are some of the things you do within the company to help LGBTQ feel more included? What are some of them, like workshops, or small groups, focus groups?
Yeah, all of those things, you know, it's yes to all of those things. Every company is a little bit different. Like one of the things that over the last 6-7 months that has popped up is LGBT ERGs in companies are aware of each other and they know each other exists and they socialize some, but really there's not like an event where they come to learn what opportunities and strategies might be for them to improve their performance as an ERG internally within a company and connect with each other and do skill building around this, and then being able to also work together on a big event like y'all come out now that we're planning for this October, which raises the profile of LGBTQ visibility in the workplace in this community. That becomes really important from an economic standpoint. Again, tying back to this idea, we're losing population, and from a talent attraction and retention issue, if LGBT folks do not see Louisville, Kentucky as a place that is an option for them to stay and be fully realized as a human being and who they are, that's an economic problem that we have. So right now it's more about building up our skills amongst all the groups than it is saying, here's a specific thing that we're going to come in and do. Next year, that's when we would get into some of those specific strategies and being able to execute.
What are some of the kind of core dimensions you look at when it comes to inclusion and diversity? So, you know, race, sexual orientation. Are there other kind of demographic things that could be financial standing, age? Or what are some of the kind of core things you look at in terms of like identifying kind of under that inclusion and diversity up front?
Yep, I got it. We're landing the plane on the systematic literature review that is actually looking at how it's being done right now. So that's going to be wrapped up. And I'm saying that is it across the nation. What do we know right now? Because there is not there's not a common measure. You have like diversity, which I know that Humana works with, and equality in HRC, but that's a different thing. That's a diversity question. So with the cultural well-being work, we've identified 5 dimensions that are important for economic growth related to this work. And so that's where our focus is. 3 of those dimensions are really looking at more qualitative data, and those are things like, first dimension is creativity. How are employees being engaged in creativity across the lifespan? Because there's a a lot of great research that shows the linkage between well-being and creativity. And that's everything from engagement with the arts to how do we understand technology and how do we understand innovation and within the context of creativity. So that's one pillar. Then the second pillar is curiosity. How do we engage in knowledge-based acquisition across the lifespan, and how are those things connected together? The third pillar is commerce, and that's looking at things like how do we understand value creation, and does an employee understand when I do X on my job, how does that create value in my community, in my company? We typically don't do a great job at helping folks to really understand that. So those three pillars of commerce, curiosity, and creativity are all qualitative measures that we can collect fairly easy. And we're looking at AI applications also to figure out how to take away some of the heavy lifting that's usually involved in that. There's two quantitative pillars that we're looking at. One is corporate social responsibility. In corporate social responsibility, we're looking at objective health metrics. What is the health of a community? Because if we're saying that there is a linkage between economy and health, wealth and health, which we all, if you're not saying that, you should probably start looking at it, but I know you are. What is the health of a community related to its corporate performance? What is that kind of, what does that look like? Then how does corporate social responsibility, CSR dollars, how do those get deployed within a community, and are those evidence-based? Are they really having the impact that a organization thinks that they're having, or is it really still more just of a great story that falls more somewhere in PR than it does an evidence-based outcome? Then we have to look at things like, where are employees that are a part of any company, where do they go when they leave the workplace? Where are those communities they're attached to? How are those communities performing? So there's a list of quantifiable metrics that we have in that are public data that are readily available. It's just a matter of collecting them in a relational way where they're telling a story. It's not just individual data points. But then the last pillar is around cultural relationships. So the way we measure cultural relationships is hope, trust, and belonging. The hope, we use the Snyder Bell-State Dispositional Hope Scale, which Dr. Snyder, University of Pennsylvania Positive Psychology. It's a predictor. It has to do with agency goals and pathways, and it's a predictor of personal success. Then the trust piece that we're using in our work is the Medical Mistrust Index, created by Dr. Leviste, who's the Dean of the School of Public Health at Tulane. The thing about medical mistrust is the fact that it is a great predictor of underutilization of preventative health services, for example. And so that's a really, really important thing, because again, going back to those things like access, it's not just about putting insurance in place and services in the community. Are they being used? And if not, why? It's a cultural question. That diabetes, the needs equals demand fallacy, is another example of medical mistrust. It's probably at play there. Belonging, there's two scales that we use. We use something called the SOBE-P and SOBE-A. And what those are looking at they're predictive of things like social isolation and reciprocity of relationships. So really looking at the relationship that's in play and not just looking at loneliness as a factor that sits by itself somewhere over in kind of a land of its own. Because everything is connected to each other. And there's a great book that I'm reading right now, just completely non sequitur. It's called Lost Connections. Johan Yari, I think is his name. It's an amazing book around this idea of belonging and how it intersects with the biomedical polyfarm world. So hope, trust, and belonging. And then we have also included in that health-related quality of life, because that's our bridge into the biomedical world from a subjective well-being standpoint. So those four measures together, and each of those measures has some sub-measures in them. Those are what we're going through the validation study on right now. All right, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time.